Hey everyone, welcome to the Way of the Superior Man book journey. This is video number 5, week 5, and chapter number 4. Now, before we go ahead, just if you're like new to this video and you're wanting to know what the hell am I doing here, I'm actually going through chapter by chapter for 52 weeks, because there's 52 chapters, and essentially doing like a journey with you. So it's one of those things where you want to be reading the book or have read the book already, and then joining me on like an extra thoughts or something like that, like just to dive into these concepts a little further and to explore with me as we go through. So this one today is really cool. I literally just ran a facilitation of the masculine edge, basically built on this chapter, because I think it's a really important chapter for men. So the chapter's called Know Your Real Edge and Don't Fake It. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the little front bit of it, I'm going to summarize it, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I take and what I think this edge really is for a man. So David Deida talks about a man has an edge. Now, how I would like to describe the edge is if you have capability, if you have potential, right? And if you're at the limits of it, you know, of your comfort zone, maybe comfort zone is a really good way of putting it. If you're at that limit of that comfort zone and you stay at that limit, it could be, you know, when you're doing sales, it could be in your relationship, it could be how you're growing, whatever it is, in whatever area. If you're at the limit or, you know, just at the peak of what you're doing, great example of even when you're doing weights, you know, just when you're straining at that point where your muscles are about to break, before you go into injury and, you know, when it's at your edge, that'll help you grow. And just like a muscle would get stronger by staying there and doing more reps at the edge, you get stronger by staying at your edge in whatever area. So David Deida really talks about the edge and really understanding and knowing your own edge and honoring it. It's not about having the same edge as somebody else. It's about knowing your edge and not faking it. So I'll read you the first little bit and then I'll summarize the chapter. It is honorable for a man to admit his fears, resistance, and edge of practice. It is simply true that each man has limit, has his capacity for growth, and his destiny. But it is dishonorable for him to lie to himself or others about his real place. He shouldn't pretend he is more enlightened than he is, nor should he stop short of his actual edge. The more a man is playing his real edge, the more valuable he is as good company for other men, the more he can be trusted to be authentic and fully present. Where a man's edge is located is less important than whether he is actually living his edge in truth, rather than being lazy or deluded. So the chapter goes on, even the first bit, it literally just says pick an area of your life. If it's like intimate relationship, if it's career, if it's, you know, how your fitness, you pick an area of your life and you see where you are on that edge. He then starts to talk about like the fact that all men are afraid, and that if you aren't afraid, you're lying, essentially. And I mean, this is one of the core things that goes through David Deida's work, is this belief of why all men are afraid. It's that, I mean, we'll find out later in the book, but there's this core theme that all a man wants is like pure release, full release, to be relieved of all duties. I mean, and that's essentially even symbolic in the way that we have sex. It's just this release. It's symbolic in the way that we create, you know, we release. And a man's tensions, which is his whole life is essentially a tension. It's only over once it's released. Finally, let go of the burden, right? So in a way, to be at an edge is to actually fully live a life in that tension. Just to live a life in that sort of, I mean, some people call it flow state in a way, you know, when you're challenged enough that it keeps you engaged and you're excited, but you're not overly challenged to the point where you're, you know, disinterested and it's too hard and you move away, right? So David Deida makes the case that all men are afraid. He makes a case that we should find our edge as men and be there. And now he has a very strong he has a very strong push towards like other men in the equation, that other men will be able to see if you're lying, other men will be able to check you on your edge. And I agree with that. But I think to some degree, like, the value of this chapter to me really sits in understanding that there is a border to your life, and that border grows with the more time you spend pushing that border out, if that makes sense. So the more you're at the edge of this border, the more you push, the more you grow. And I think it's really good for us to actually really acknowledge our edges, acknowledge this so that we can grow more. Like, I think that's where the edge really comes through. And a good mentor of mine, Dr. Anna Rubinstein from Rites of Passage, the Rites of Passage Institute, he talks about some ancient tribes that have the story about the reason why a man goes through like a rite of passage, right? Which, if you don't know what a rite of passage is, essentially when we are wanting to help, let's say, a young boy. It could be actually at any point in life, but let's just use the example of a young boy transitioning into adulthood. A proper rite of passage would have been in a tribe. You know, they would have to do some kind of challenge. They would get acknowledgement for their gifts and talents, and then they would integrate within the community. And these tribes had this saying. Now, when I say these tribes, I will do better in the future to know exactly which tribe. I know he has a specific one, and I'm not sure whether it's the African tribe or whether it's the Aboriginal tribe. But nonetheless, in the future, when I do mention a tribe, I will be better at just being like, it's this one from this place. So he has this saying where they say that a man, through their rite of passage, must be humbled enough that when he's faced with fire, that he comes out at the right place, like meat, right? So imagine that if you put a piece of meat on the fire for too long, it is burnt. That is going way over your boundary. That is going over your edge. That is going further and not honoring your edge, and you're getting burnt from it. Then undercooked and raw, when you haven't really been challenged, and there's a whole bunch of things that come up with that. But what they want is men to be properly cooked. And that's why they would do things like take them out into the wilderness to go and kill a lion. So if they were specifically killing lions, then that was going to be in Africa. So this idea of an edge is the thing that makes men grow outside of themselves, push further. And I really like that about this chapter. So the facilitation I just did was I got men to stand up, and I took a piece of tape and put it in the middle of the floor. And I got people to really rate where they were on the edge. And using David Deida's way, I got the men around the circle to really challenge them on their positioning and whether they think that they were lying or not, because that is a really big part of this chapter. Because here's a line that's really good. Let me read a section for you. Have you lost touch with the fears that are limiting and shaping your income and style of livelihood? If you have deluded yourself and feel that you are not afraid, then you are lying to yourself. All men are afraid, unless they are perfectly free. If you cannot admit this, you are pretending to yourself and to others. Your friends will feel your fear even if you do not. Thus they will lose trust in you, knowing you are deluding yourself, lying to yourself, and therefore likely to lie to them, consciously or unconsciously. Or perhaps you are very aware of your fears, your fear to take risks, your fear of failing, or your fear of succeeding. Perhaps you are comfortable with your life and you fear the lifestyle change that might accompany a changing career. Even though the new career will be closer to what you really want to do with your life, some men fear the feeling of fear and therefore don't even approach their edge. So essentially, that tribe taking a young boy to go out and kill a lion, You know, they would know that that is something that would humble them. It's something that would make them grow because it's something so far outside of what they can do. So what I really like about this is that it makes you want to actually go out and push, go out and find out what your edge of yourself is. And I think that's very important. I think that's very important for us, man. It's a very good chapter. And yeah, I mean, it does get a little bit of David Deida spiritual chat towards the end. I'm gonna probably use that as a like spiritual. There's a little bit of woo-woo mumbo jumbo that comes in, and I'm gonna probably use that like jargon a little bit later on within this book review, because I find that he gets a little poetic. And quite honestly, sometimes you just want, as a guy, to be really clear and open and honest. And I think sometimes with the poetic language just comes in a little bit and makes you a little bit more confused rather than getting you straight to the point. Because quite honestly, we want to be really clear with our words. We want to be clear with what's actually being said so that men can grow. So yeah, this is towards the end. A free man is free to live, acknowledge his fears without hiding them or hiding from them. Live with your lips pressed against your fears, kissing your fears, neither pulling back nor aggressively violating them. This overly sexualization of the fear of the masculine traits. And I mean, he's got like later, you must penetrate the world as you penetrate your woman. I think a lot of these lines, I worry that sometimes people pull away from the text because of that. And it also, you know, here's the other thing, and this is something that I realized within myself. Maybe this over-sexualization, I mean, it doesn't touch on it too much in this chapter, but maybe this over-sexualization of this is actually more to do with my past history of suppression of sexuality. And so I'm maybe being a little bit prude with it, but I find that it could be said in other ways. Could easily be said in other ways. And I think none more is true than where we go to next. We go into always hold to your deepest realization. And I remember when I first read this next chapter that we're going to do next week, I found myself going, I'm going to have to like dissect that a little bit deeper, because there's a lot of the spiritual mumbo, woo-woo mumbo jumbo, which is not wrong. Again, it's not wrong, but it's I'd love to act as a bridge between the woo-woo and the people in a way, so that we can actually very clearly get these concepts across to a broader audience, because we need more men to understand this rather than step away from it because it's too spiritual. That's my point of view. All right. Thank you so much for joining the book journey. I'll see you next week for Always Hold to Your Deepest Realization.